Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Typology, the podcast on which we explore the mystery of the human adventure and the human personality through the lens of the Enneagram. I'm joined by my co-host and producer, Anthony Skinner.
Ian Cron. Happy to be here. Excited about our guest today.
I am stoked about our guest. Everybody, please give it up for Finnian Kelly, Enneagram 7, author of the new book. Hold it, looking for it. There it is, Intentionality. A groundbreaking guide to brain consciousness and radical self-transformation. Finnian, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ian and Anthony. I'm curious about this because I've heard you go deep, and I might get some therapy on this session as well. So I'm welcome.
Oh, who told you that?
New baby,
Word
so I
is
might
out.
need some.
Who told you that?
I just do
That's
my research.
awesome.
I do my research.
Oh, my. Wow. Well, he comes in well prepared. Okay. Well, I don't know it's up to you, Finnian, how far we go, but we're delighted that you're here. And how did you learn about the Enneagram? How did you learn you were an Enneagram 7? And how did it land with you?
So I was just reflecting on this because I went on a mountain bike ride, and obviously in the beautiful fall colors in Aspen that we were just talking about, that you were there a year ago. And like most things that I've discovered on my journey, I actually discovered in the Entrepreneurs Organization in EO. It's a peer-to-peer group of founder-led entrepreneurs all around the world, and I've been in it for 11 years. And we're always doing different learning experiences. And one time there was a woman who guided us through the Enneagram process. And I love learning about myself. So I discovered I was a 7, and I was very curious about it. I was interested, but there's some people who went fully into it, and I've sort of danced with it a few times, and I'm curious to learn more about it as well.
Mm. And you mentioned to me early on, before we hit record, that you have some questions about it, right? Like you have some ambivalence about the Enneagram.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the Enneagram per se. I actually think out of all the tests, I think it's super. Like I think it's probably the best. What I struggle with is when people label themselves something and identify with something, and then they make that their personality, and it almost validates it. And then they go, well, that's just who I am in that regard. And I go, well, are you that? Or is that a conditioned process as well? So that's more what I do with personality tests is don't label yourself because of something. Learn from it, but don't limit yourself just because you've been defined as something.
So I would say that those people who do what you're describing are in the wrong. Mm-hmm. The Enneagram, we have a mantra, doesn't put you in a box. It tells you about a box you're already in and how to get out of it.
Uh-huh.
Right?
I like that.
And because there are conditioned processes in our personalities that serve us as little people, helps us get our needs met. And then later in life, if we drag them behind us in our little red wagons into adulthood, they start to work against us. And to limit us and to rob us of freedom. So what the Enneagram does is it says, hey, look, here are these predictable, habitual patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting that show up in your life all the time. Many of them are just defensive strategies that you're using to navigate the world. You think because they worked for you as a little person that they're going to work for you as an adult. But guess what? They actually become self-sabotaging things when you're operating without any kind of self-awareness, right? And without the ability to step back from your present moment experience and to, with a non-blaming, compassionate gaze, observe what's going on and make different choices than the ones you would make on autopilot, right? Mm-hmm. So that to me is, so I would actually be in agreement with you on what you're describing.
And that's why you're the master. I love it. And yeah, I feel that's a very good way to approach it. And what was quite interesting.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, you go, Anthony.
I was just going to say you're missing the power of a great tool if you use it as an excuse for poor behavior.
Yes.
Yeah, I definitely agree. What was really interesting was last year, I think it was last year, every year, one of our products is Intentionality is a love path. And it's about how do you bring consciousness to your relationship, that idea of when you get married, happy ever after is a big joke. It's like that so many people fall into that trap. So we went what's a process to really design, how do we navigate relationship? What really matters to us? And part of that is each year is to do an annual immersion where you work on your relationship. So we do it ourselves. We practice what we preach. And last year I was doing a speaker tour through Africa. And we take turns every year to organize the Love Path. And then I organized it in Uganda last year. And we're staying in this incredible place on the top of the River Nile. And I actually got a person from South Africa to do a couples Enneagram experience with us, where we each had our own reports, and then they showed the cross-pollination. And then we spent a few days going through it and exploring it and going, what were our learnings? What were the learnings about the other person? And then how do we navigate our relationship with more intentionality through that practice? And I thought that was a brilliant practice of how to make it more applicable.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? Like I know that dating apps aren't what they were in their heyday, right?
Mm-hmm.
That said, part of the reason I think they fail, and this is not research original to me, is because they sort people by compatibility. So I want to find someone who also likes the outdoors. I want to find someone else who also is a Republican or a Democrat. I want to find someone else who, you know what I mean? Like they're looking for compatibility, which actually the research shows is not what makes a great relationship. So in a way, the sorting that happens in those online, tests or, onboarding things actually thwarts the very thing it's promising to deliver, right? It's difference and being complementary in one's differences with another person that make for a long-lasting, satisfying relationship, right? So if you're, in many ways, you could say that, all right, so is your partner a 7?
Yeah, she is.
All right.
It's actually quite amazing. There's quite a lineup of different, like we actually have the first 3 numbers, I think, identical, and then there's switches.
Yeah. So one of the things I always tell people who are married to a person who occupies the same space in terms of type is just be careful that you're not reinforcing each other's worst tendencies, right? Like if you were married to a 6, right, the loyalist, so that's somebody who's much more risk averse than you are, somebody that is more anxious, well, not necessarily more anxious than you are, they just have a different way of handling it. Anyway, you would have a countervailing balance, right? Like a counterbalance, right? Like someone who would be tapping the brakes when you're hitting the gas, right? The problem with 2 7s or 2 4s or 2 3s or 2 2s is they're both hitting the same gas pedal all the time, right? And so now, granted, no 2 7s are completely alike. So it's
that
not
was
like
my biggest learning. That was my biggest learning is that we thought we're saying, but if you actually looked at it, we were very different 7s once you got through it. The way we we communicated, and I learned a lot thinking, we were the same, but actually we're not. We handle things very differently.
Yes. You are very similar at some core levels, but how you give expression to that would be like very, very different. You've just had a baby, and that will change the dynamic quite a bit. You also could be 2 different subtypes of 7s. I don't know if you've gone that far down.
Yeah, we
into
did.
it.
We did.
Okay. So what is her subtype?
All right. So let me quickly look at this. So is this like the tri-type?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay.
Subtypes would be social, self-preservation, or sexual 1-to-1.
She's preservation.
Yeah.
And I'm 1-to-1.
Yeah, I was going to say you're probably 1-to-1. So that means that you have 2 differing instinctual stacks, and I won't go and bore you with all the details of this lest we suddenly lapse into a workshop. But your survival drives, you tend to over-rely on one instinct more than she does, right? When that's the case, you can have 2 types that are the same, but look and act very differently, actually.
And that gets very confusing because you're like, I thought we were the same. Why aren't you seeing this the same way?
Yeah.
And
Ian, so Ian's a 4 and his wife is a 9, but having nothing to do with types, their subtypes are exactly the same as yours. Ian is a self-present and is a 1-to-1. So give an example, Ian, because I think it's really enlightening.
We all have these powerful molecular, cellular level kinds of survival instincts, drives, right? But we tend to over rely on one versus the others, right? So in the case of a self-pres, it's sort of like it's very identified with physical survival. I am my, sort of my body, right? So it's like they're more concerned about things like as a self-pres, she's probably at noon thinking about what's going to be on for dinner. You know what I mean?
Oh, all day long. That's where she spends her time. What can we plan for dinner?
Yes, right. Like what's next? Where's our next meal coming from? Is the roof okay? Is the house okay? Are we safe? Probably likes to get to the airport a lot sooner than you do to make a flight.
So literally identical. Goes so early and I arrive as it's
Yes,
boarding.
exactly. Right. So you are also more drawn to high intensity things. So you would take risks she's not going to be as apt to take. So, for example, I've worked with because a lot of my work is with entrepreneurs, with CEOs, with companies. One of the things that I'm so used to with entrepreneurs is there's a disproportionate number of sevens among them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, was that true when you took the test with that group where there were a lot of sevens?
Yeah,
right?
there was.
They're just risk tolerant and they're charismatic. They are optimistic to a fault, sometimes toxically positive at times. We can do this. We can do anything. We're the next Google. I mean, it's like, and their mind is so future oriented that staying in the present moment is super difficult. And actually reflecting on the past, particularly hard things in the past, is like no go. Don't want to go there. Don't even know what to do with those feelings. So in my work with sevens, it's so much fun. And it's really, really satisfying. But I definitely see where the very things that can get them to succeed is often the very things that get them to fail.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, 1-to-1, you're more risk tolerant than a self-pres would be. So where this gets helpful is, like, for example, you're someone as a 1-to-1, you see your relationship with your partner or with a very small group of very close others, if you weren't married, let's say, as being necessary to your personal survival. Your partner is thinking more about other things and their own personal survival. Like it's just a different lens, right? And it sometimes explains why conflict happens in the relationship. So, for example, you're probably someone that is, you think about your relationship a lot, probably. How's it doing?
It's my number one focus.
How's it doing? Are we good? What do we need to work on? What, are we, just kind of constantly checking back in. And your wife won't have nearly the same degree of focus or concern about that. She has concern about it, but not to the degree that you do. So like with my wife,
she actually can find it exhausting.
Yes.
Sometimes. She's like, enough.
Yeah, well,
we're good.
Because you have more anxiety around it.
Yeah.
Right? Now, that over-focus causes problems, right? So one of the things the Enneagram does is it tries to bring instincts into balance, right? Mm-hmm. Like just chill out on the 1-to-1 thing and actually find out what your repressed instinct is and work on that. So like Anthony said, my wife and I are the exact opposite, right? And it just explains so many problems that we had. Like, for example, if I said to my wife, what do you want to do tonight? Let's just get on the couch, let's get in our jammies and we'll get on a blanket and we'll watch a movie and we'll have pizza and let's just snuggle and, like that. Very focused on just the two of, like, very focused on our relationship. Whereas I was more like, I don't know. I would be concerned about other things and I couldn't understand, why aren't you as concerned about these things as I am?
See that stack of bills on the kitchen table?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's pay those bills and then we'll talk.
Yeah, and then we'll snuggle. But anyway, so again, the instincts really help you understand difference, and the subtypes help us understand why two people of the same type can appear so different. And once you have that, it's just a nice addition to a conversation that helps a relationship move forward with a little bit less friction and more compassion and understanding.
Mm. Could I bring it back to another partnership? So you spoke about working with entrepreneurs,
yes,
being visionaries. Obviously, there's a lot of pitfalls that come with that. What's the optimal partner if I'm thinking of a integrator, COO to balance me out? What would be the Enneagram numbers to look for?
Well, I mean, it could be any number. I mean, and this goes to the topic of your book. It's just like, how conscious is the other person, right? Like, how self-aware is the other person? Has the other person done enough work on themselves so that they are transcending the problems inherent in their personality structure, right? So that means that any type could be successful with you to the degree that they're self-aware and have done some work, right? Now, I would say that for sevens, I can think of one off the top of my head, a CEO of a company, and their CFO, COO was a 6, and it was a beautiful partnership, in part because they both have a relationship with anxiety. They both manage it very differently. But that 6 was always able, and he had learned how to do this in a way that didn't like throw a wet blanket on everybody's dream. He just had a way of saying, that's a really good idea, Bob, and not but, and I think we need to wait on doing that until the second quarter of next year, or, we're going to run into problems, right? He would just tap the brakes gently, because the 7 was way out over their skis. I'll use a nice Aspen metaphor, right? Like just out over their skis, charging. And the 6 just sort of tap the brakes, right? Tap the brakes, tap the brakes.
And they really honor each other in that relationship too. And really they do. Trust each other.
Yeah, they do. Now, the other one that is a great partner for 7s and are 3s. The reason is 7s are really, really, really great in the startup phase. But typically, not always, because we're talking about probabilities here, right? Not certainties. Oftentimes, the 7 is not a good manager. So the moment there's an infrastructure and people to report to them and 401ks to figure out and health insurance, look at you. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Shot my head off.
And here's the other thing. You're so risk tolerant so let's say you build a big organization, right? Or a big company, and you were the visionary, you were the Pied Piper at the front of the parade. Everyone's following you. We got a vision. We got a plan. We're killing it. Numbers are growing. Suddenly this thing grows up behind you, right? And it starts to suffocate you because you're like, I really am not that good at managing people. I'm really good with ideas. I'm really good with energy. I'm really good in the startup like energy space. 3s are better CEOs than 7s. Just typically speaking, and they're much better at building systems and more predictability into the system, because when you suddenly have 100 people working for you, they will resist the kind of change you love. And then the system slows. It's no longer a little like a little speedboat, pulling a skier behind it, like a ski nautique. Right now, it's an aircraft carrier. It takes a lot longer to turn the aircraft carrier. The 7 gets, you know where I'm going, right? So,
yeah, I do. Yeah.
So there are other types, but that can really complement it. But again, I'm just a big believer, man. If they've done their work and they're self-aware, any of those types could be great. Folks, I got news for you. Everyone is an addict. Whether it's people-pleasing, endlessly scrolling through TikTok, workaholism, unhealthy relationships, or drug and alcohol abuse, all of us as human beings look for the next fix to help numb and endure the constant emotional, psychological, and spiritual distress that all of us feel because we live in a broken world. The problem is that using external solutions for internal problems is like going to the hardware store to buy bread. It never works. That's why I wrote The Fix, how the 12 steps offer a surprising path of transformation for the well-adjusted, the down and out, and everyone in between. The 12 steps of recovery are a spiritual design for living that can profoundly change the lives, not just of people with identified addictions like drug and alcohol abuse, but of everyone. And that means you. Both The Fix and the companion workbook are now available for pre-order anywhere books are sold, such as Audible, Barnes & Noble, Target, Books A Million, and Amazon. Just visit ianmorgancron.com/thefix to secure your copy today. And as a thank you for your pre-order, I'll send you a sneak peek of Chapter 1. Yup, the whole first chapter. Not only will you learn how you and everyone you know can benefit from the 12 steps, but you'll read some raw, honest stories from my own recovery journey, and you'll get a few practical pieces of advice from someone who's been there before the rest of the book drops in January. Simply pre-order The Fix anywhere books are sold. Then visit ianmorgancron.com/get your download to get started on chapter 1 now.
I really like that point. I don't think that point is made enough, that it's not just about the type, it's your level of awareness.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. What are you going to say, Anthony?
Well, I was just going to say that's been it could be an explanation for some of Finian's past, because you have built and then exited, right? So that's really leaning into a strength of yours as a 7. A lot of 7s are serial starters, which is not a bad thing, to start something up and then know when to make your exit, when to pass it off.
Yeah, my problem has been, though, I've never found the right complementary partner to make sure that turns into a massive big company. That's why I've exited a lot of the times, because I get frustrated and disappointed. But if I actually look back at those companies, they could have been so much bigger and so much better. So it's right now I'm doing that again. Like we've got a couple of incredible new endeavors. I've got Intentionality. I'm literally hiring my partner, my complementary right now, and we're having our first offsite together this weekend, which I'm super excited about. And it's very clear that I've got a few key roles, and success looks like I'm only doing these, the really high energy things, and you're responsible for the other elements. And then in my other business, which is Cascada, which is a revolutionary hydrothermal wellness resort that we're launching in Portland in November this year. Incredible. And we'll roll across America. I've got 2 business partners, and we're all very different. We've got one person is just the incredible operations finance person. We've got another person is the creative and design and pulling it together. And then I'm the sort of the magic dust on top, the culture, the capital, and really being intentional about the experience. And I've just been loving having business partners. And it's so funny because in these entrepreneur groups, there's so much trauma through business partners. Like, people love to project on you, oh, I don't get a business partner. But it's like anything. It depends on who your partner is. It's like a marriage. We know that a good marriage makes you happier, but a bad marriage makes you miserable as well. So it's been a really interesting experience breaking into a new realm of partnership, because I've always been alone, quite a single person in some regards.
Yes, that's not unusual either. You know, it's interesting. My son-in-law is a 7, and he and my daughter launched a sparkling water company that is exploding, right? It's just doing great. It's called Ora Bora.
Great.
And they're just doing fantastic, right? They started in their kitchen, right? And they're crushing it. And it's really exciting to watch. But he has all that 7 energy, right? Super 7 energy. Fortunately, he has built a team. They've built a team around themselves that, you know, of a bunch of people that, and they use the Enneagram. Like, the Enneagram has been helpful to them. Right. Like, and again, it's not like the Enneagram is like magic. It's just like, even if your partners, right, if you just had them do it, right, and you had an hour conversation just about, so here's the different lenses through which we see the world, and we don't have to talk about this every day. But it's good to know that our way of seeing the world is just one of 9 different ways. And we need to lean into each other's, we need to leverage our differences for the good of the whole, and honor our differences in a way that leads us to our desired outcomes, you know, our preferred outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's honoring the feelings part. One of my, obviously, intentionality is it's about prioritizing feelings over outcomes. It's a feeling first methodology for living and leadership. And I often say that feelings are running your business, whether you know it or not, and whether you like it or not. And this is just bringing awareness to go, there is no such thing as a rational human being. We are all making decisions from an emotional base. The people who think they're rational, they're just more disconnected from their emotions. So having this as a tool to bring awareness and going, all right, these are potentially some of the things that are impacting your decision making is a great methodology.
I remember one time listening to Anthony Scalia, the Supreme Court Justice, I think it was Anthony Scalia, who said that all decisions that the Supreme Court make are not rational. That essentially all decisions are emotional decisions. And then afterwards, they write briefs or, statements that provide the rational reason for why they made that emotional decision. But he said at their root, all decisions are emotional decisions.
And isn't that incredible? I'm going to follow up. I want that quote because I think that would be very powerful for me to use that, because we're deluding ourselves if we don't think it's the case.
Yes, but at the same time, right, like one of the cool things about the Enneagram is it teaches us that there are really 3 brain centers. That we have our minds, right? Our rational prefrontal cortex, our prefrontal cortex, we make executive decisions. We try to do it on the basis of reason, analytical, discursive thought. Then we have our heart, and the heart is its own intelligence. Like that's why I always tell Enneagram 5s, who are our most cerebral types, right? I'm always like, feelings have their own intelligence, right? Like you can't you don't decide to marry your partner on the basis of pure discursive analytical reason, right? Like your heart said something to you, right?
There's lots of neurons in the heart.
There is, right? And your gut. So that would be 8, 9s, and 1s, right? They are people who are highly intuitive, and we talk about making decisions and feeling things in our gut all the time. So bringing those 3 things into balance, like I think if you overly rely on feelings, you're just actually missing out on the opportunity to have those 2 other intelligences weigh in.
Yeah, I like that. So you said 8, 9, and 1 are gut. Yep. What's
5, 6, and 7 is head.
Head. 5, really? 7's a head. Interesting.
And 2s, 3s, and 4s are heart. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have feelings, right? So I'm not saying that. But you probably are a fairly analytical, thoughtful person, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I am. You can see I've written a book which puts in a method for analytical people to understand spirituality.
Yes.
So yes.
Right. So now the chances are, even sometimes people think 7s are so heartfelt. And the reason is you're very effusive and you're very expressive. I know lots of 7s who are very tactile. My son is a 7. Every 5 minutes, he's got his arm around you. He's touching you. He's like, you know what I mean? And they seem, and they can, but they are thinking, lots of thinking all the time. And a lot of times it's anxious. There's a lot of anxiety in the 5, 6, and 7. I'm a 4, so I'm very much in the heart triad. I'm very feeling oriented. And so, for example, you might be a guy that I would call if I was like, man, I just don't know how to think about this. I might call a 5 or I might call a 6 or a 7, and be like, well, what do you think? Because my feelings I don't want to just listen to my feelings. I want to train my critical thinking too and bring it online and my gut before I make decisions or move in directions and things like that. So, just trying to bring them all into balance.
It's actually good hearing this because I was the analytical thinking person and I found the limitation of that.
Yes.
And that's when I actually really leaned into the feelings element and I realized, it's the integration of the 2. That's where the magic happens. So I'm very grateful I went through the intellect, but then I also went, you can only go so far with the intellect. You have to transcend it to another level.
Yes. And then the next phase might be something to think about is intuition and gut. Like how does that brain play out in your work? And that's for maybe a future book to think about. Like, well, how do I also pay attention to what that brain says? And we tend to over privilege rational, especially since the Enlightenment, right? Just rational, discursive, analytical thought. Right. We just think that reigns supreme. And then feelings.
We've worshipped.
Yeah. And we kind of dismiss feelings as being like something that's not, it's like they're very unreliable. They come and they come and they go. It's like, well, so are your thoughts. Anyway. And then the one we really dismiss is the gut. Like, what is your gut telling you? about this thing you want to do or this decision you have to make? Like, where is it showing up for you, like in terms of like at the level of the body, in terms of like your gut telling you? So again, there are ways to bring all those things on the line, and to bring them up to in our awareness so that we're using all three.
How do you activate the gut one more? What's your tools to be able to do that?
Yeah, well, actually, we're going to talk about breathwork here. So I'm really stoked about that because I think breathwork is a phenomenal way of getting back in. Like here's the thing about the body, right? And again, I'm quoting somebody else, but it really is that the body is very honest. Like the body is just tells the truth. Whether you want it to or not, like how many times have I made a decision on the basis of feelings when I knew in my gut it was wrong? But the feelings were just overwhelmingly positive. You know what I mean? And I just went with it. And my body was going like, I'm not lying. Like, I'm not lying to you. This is not a good idea. And I regretted it, right, afterwards. Now, I think things like breath work, I think things like yoga, I think one of the things that I've done in the last 2 years, Anthony will tell you, is I meet with a trainer every day, 5 days a week, just getting more attuned to my body and not just getting in shape, but just actually not being like a guy walking around with a brain on a stick. It's like where I'm more integrated and it's like, oh, I'm listening to my body. I'm listening to my heart. I'm listening to my mind. And, it's tricky, but it can be done for sure.
It's amazing how often we'll just bring awareness when I'm running a company offsite and they're thinking, and I go, notice you're not breathing anymore. You've just disconnected yourself. The subconscious program's activated and you're not aware of what's happening. So bringing that awareness of the breath into the body, it's everything.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be nice if everyone kept a dual experience of one being aware of their breath sensation in the body and being engaged in this conversation right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just feel like so much of the dance with the Enneagram is around just balancing things. And you're never going to get it titrated perfectly because we all have proclivities and inclinations toward certain patterns. But if we do it with some conscious awareness, we can just move through the world with more emotional wisdom, spiritual wisdom, and be smarter and be more.
Yeah, ultimately you just get better at decision making.
Yeah.
It's like, why would you only use one faculty? Like, why not bring it all in to make better decisions?
Right. Yeah. And if you're really out of touch with a particular faculty, know it so that you can go to other people who have it. At the very least, that can be terrifically helpful. All right, let's talk about intentionality. This new book, the subtitle is A Groundbreaking Guide to Breath, Consciousness, and Radical Self-Transformation. Tell us all about it, man.
Well, we've already touched on some of it. It was really written through my journey of following through of my conditioned programming effectively. And that's when I talk about conditioned programming, I'm talking about the programs that are in our subconscious that are running most of our daily thoughts, behaviors, feelings, all these different decisions. We think we're conscious beings, but most of the time this is just an automatic program running. And what I realized was that I'd effectively played out the whole scenario of my life multiple times. And I realized, oh, wow, like there's something causing friction or challenges in my life that I'm not aware of. So I need to understand how the mind works. And I went on a deep exploration of uncovering, bringing more awareness to myself and seeing how a lot of things that I thought I wanted, I didn't actually really want. They were just a conditioned program. There was this illusion of the idea that when I get there, I'll be happier or I'll feel more peace or feel more fulfilled. And the funny thing about when is for a lot of people, it never gets there. Or for me, I actually did get to the when, and the feeling that I hoped I was going to get wasn't there. I wasn't even aware what the feeling I was hoping for, but I definitely didn't get what I was hoping. And it ended up really magnifying the lack I had inside of myself, and it forced me to go on a deep exploration. And what I've realized through my experience, and it is just my experience, it's my perspective. I really want to make sure that people are always aware of that. Don't just trust what I've said, try it on, try your own experience. Was that I was very privileged to have the space, have the energy, the resources, the network to go on this deep exploration. And it was still super complicated. it was challenging to find a path. So I wanted to integrate all my learnings in a very simple book that has a lot of depth that could communicate to both minds, and even the concept that we have different minds is a bit of a story, but to people who have a different way of learning and go through an experiential based learning. So you're not just understanding, you go through a place where you know because you've actually experienced the activities through the breath. So I'm really grateful that it's out there now, and hearing, because it's at that time where it's been out there long enough now, and hearing the testimonials and what people's experience are, that's been the biggest thing. They went, oh, I didn't realize I was actually getting recoded while I was reading that book. And that makes me feel super happy.
So you did a walk on the Camino.
Mm-hmm.
What was that about? And was that part of this journey of self-discovery you're describing?
It's definitely one of my most transformational moments. And the Camino is this ancient pilgrimage, sacred pilgrimage across Spain. You start in France and you walk across the Pyrenees and you walk across the whole country, the whole width of Spain, over 500 miles, and tens of thousands of people do it. And it's incredible. And why it was so special was because I actually gave myself the space. It wasn't about anything else. It was the space. It's, you take a month off. Who's taken a month off to do deep self-reflection? And in that time, I could basically look at my life with a new perspective and start seeing, wow, there's a lot of patterns here. And I started really focusing on forgiving myself for all the different elements that contributed to where I was at in my life. And I had an incredible divine moment there that really transitioned me into a place where I then didn't question anymore. And that was a really interesting moment, because my intellect was always struggling with, I suppose, spirituality or religion, different words. And I went deep into physics, and I understand the concept of oneness and the unified field. And I could understand that, but I didn't know it. And once I had that experience where I had this divine moment, I didn't care what other people thought anymore or said or anything else. I knew. And that transitioned my whole way of approaching life. Suddenly, it was a lot more of just peace. I was in a loving place. There was no doubt. The fear had sort of dropped away, and it gave me a lot of strength to go, oh, this is exactly where I'm meant to be right now. And I kept walking, and it was an incredible awakening for me. And out of everything I've done, I think it's the most powerful. And it's the one thing where I just tell people, just go walk the Camino. If you're a little bit confused, you're a little bit stuck, you're going through trauma, just go walk the Camino. And there's something about the energetic field where things will open up for you.
I love that. The original word for pilgrim, I think, is in Latin is peregrinus, which literally means, so means to pray with your feet.
Yes.
And I love that. That's why things like the Camino and other places like that, where every step becomes a prayer.
Especially because you might have 100 blisters on your feet and you're tired. That's actually the moment where you're finally present.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I've had many friends who've walked the Camino. My wife is always like poking me, we got to go walk the Camino while we still can. And it's like, she's right. We do need to get around to it. And plus I get off on that kind of stuff in a big way.
Yeah. And what was really special is I did it at this transition of my relationship, and then I met my current partner, and she experienced me going over, and she witnessed the transformation when I came back. And then it was always in her field that she would go walk the Camino. And exactly 5 years later, she went and walked the Camino by herself. And it was a really defining moment in our relationship. And now, that was 2 years ago, now we have our first baby boy. And next year we're going to go and walk some of the Camino with our little child.
Nice.
And honor that connection together.
Nice. So in this season of self-reflection, how have you dealt with afflictive or aversive emotions, feelings, things like grief, disappointment, loss, sadness, anger, fear? We know that sevens more than any other type, really struggle with the darker emotions on the spectrum. So how did you deal with it without possibly ducking them?
This has been my hardest journey for sure. And it's something I have to be constantly being aware of, because there's a natural tendency to avoid them. And actually how I avoided them was through visioning. It was fantasy.
Yes.
I would escape the present moment because it was too confronting and too scary for me, and I'd create this great vision. But then what actually would happen is often the vision was fantasy, and this is something which I talk a lot about now, about the danger of the difference between vision and fantasy. And then as I would get closer on the journey and realize that, the vision actually is fantasy, fear would start creeping in. So then I would create another vision. That was my cycle, just constantly on that journey, which was exhausting for me. It was exhausting for other people around me as well. People get excited, but it wasn't coming from a grounded, centered place.
Well, you get a reputation as being the boy who cried vision, right? Like, I got this idea, and then people are like, oh, that's a great idea. And then, he got bored of that one, or he just moved on to a different one. And so, there's a big difference between a fantasy and a dream,
Definitely. And one of my challenges is that because I actually do have such a determination, strength, I actually would make them happen a lot of the time, but they weren't ever going to fulfill me. And that was the dangerous part. It was like I had this other part that in some regards, I wish it was just all talk. It would have been easier because then it wouldn't have been 5 years of my life.
Right.
So how I've done it now is I have to really remind myself to lean into it. And I constantly think of digesting and integrating. I'm like, this is coming up and it's actually a great moment and it's going to free me a little bit more. So I'll give you an example. We had this unexpected birth plan. It ended up very, very different from what I expected. And it triggered a little trauma loop from me. There was something deep from my childhood with my mum that was activated. And at a very happy time, well, it should have been a very happy time, I was not feeling grounded or being present. And it was super challenging. And my mind was at me and judging me for, you should be showing up differently. And I just realized, oh no, this is what I need. It had to be so confronting because this energy needed to be integrated and digested. So I spent 2 weeks completely disconnected from the world after the birth, no escape. Like I didn't even have a friend to message. I was fully present and in it. And it was torture. It felt like a silent meditation retreat or a darkness retreat. I was so in it. However, I'm just so grateful that I did that and that I'm even at a place where I recognize how important that is, because I don't have any negative charge to that experience anymore. In fact, I have deep gratitude and I laugh about it and it's so amazing. But that would have been something in my past that would have just kept coming up every 7 years, just kept sabotaging me because I didn't want to face it. So now I remind myself, this is my moment. Thank you. And I love it and I lean into it and I use the breath. My breath is my best friend to just constantly keep integrating it and just knowing that when I just see it as energy rather than as an emotion and breath can move that through me, it's not as scary as it used to be.
So explain to me why and how breath work is so important in a life of intentionality.
Yeah. So breath by nature, it's happening. We don't have to be aware of it. We don't have to think about it. It's controlled by the autonomic system, which is great. And there's a lot of other parts of our body, like our digestion and our blood flow moving, which is also controlled by the autonomic system. The one difference about breath is we can also consciously control it, which is very interesting. So that starts bringing awareness that it's a gift given by divinity, God, whatever it is, to help bring a greater awareness. It effectively gives us a pause between the automatic program being activated, and then we can be in this level of conscious awareness to go, all right, you're feeling this, you're feeling the energy, you see where this pattern's going to go. Is this going to serve you? Is this going to be the highest good? And it suspends that moment of taking that behavior. And then you have an opportunity to override the system. Now, sometimes you can't do that in the moment, but even the breath, you have an opportunity to integrate the experience that is going to cause you more challenges in the future. So that's why I think it's so powerful, because it's with us at all time. It's available to us. It's free. And it just gives you a bit of agency. So you're not just an automatic robot spitting off these behaviors, which then you end up going into a shame or regret, and the ego then takes you and you just compound the whole problem. So that's why I think breath is so powerful. And the way I like to think of it is, I talk about in the book about circuit breakers. It gives you a chance to go, too much energy is coming into the system that I don't know how to handle. It's going to blow up the system. I'm going to short circuit myself. I'm going to lose my mind. I'm going to blow the system. And instead, we can activate the circuit breaker. So then you can regulate and decide, all right, when do you want to turn the power back on? And that moment could cause you, or prevent you from doing something that you can't come back from, saying a word, an act, which could cause so much damage.
Yes.
And that's what I want to prevent people from going into.
And here's why I think this is where this feathers so beautifully with the Enneagram, right? Like, to give you an example. So you're an Enneagram 2, and your attention often is going right toward what other people are feeling and what other people need and wanting to meet those needs. And your automatic pattern or habitual pattern is, I'm going to go meet that need, right? So they don't know how to say no to requests for help. They don't know, right? Now, oftentimes we tell people, you can pick up on these things somatically, right? So it's like, oh, I am feeling like I'm being pulled along by that other person's unexpressed need for help right now, right? And I'm feeling this pressure to meet that need, even though I don't have the time, treasure, talent, or resources to do so. I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and say, I'll help. So in that moment, what a 2 has an opportunity to do, and we've coached people to do this, right? We call it the sacred pause, right? You can breathe into what's happening in that moment, which then expands the space between stimulus and response, right? It suddenly opens up that gap where you can make a different choice by saying, I really can't pick up your kids today because I'm picking up my own kids at the exact same time at a school on the other side of town. And though everything inside me wants to help you, because that's where I get a lot of my self-esteem is from you appreciating all the good things I do for you, I can just breathe my way. And you give actual breathwork exercises for people to do where it's like, just learning, okay, I can interrupt the circuit on this pattern and do something different and more true to the highest expression of who I am.
Beautifully articulated. It creates freedom because you don't compound the mistakes as well. That's another thing about the circuit breaker is sometimes mistakes are made, but then it sets off all these other actions which then compound the mistake. So I'll give you an example. I was just coaching a sporting team to break a world record, and we did a training experience where we simulated the race across America. It was a bike racing experience. And in the middle of the training, a bike flew off the back, a $20,000 bike, because it wasn't strapped in properly. And that's a pretty big mistake in that experience. And it was this moment of the training kicking in. I saw him start taking a few breaths. And I actually said, what happens now is the most important. Don't compound the mistake. So the mistake's made, but what's going to be the biggest mistake that comes from that? And that's the power of the breath. It just realizes it was a mistake. But what would be worse is for me to be in my head questioning everything, which then causes a car crash and who knows where it can compound. Instead, just going, yes, a mistake happened and I've wrecked a bike, but let's not wreck the whole experience.
Right. Cool. So as we wrap up, give me one breathwork exercise everybody can do, regardless of their type, when they begin to see they've been activated or triggered, and they can see that they're moving in the direction of a habitual self-defeating behavior. What give them a breathwork where they can elevate consciousness and have more self-awareness in the moment so they have freedom to make a different choice.
Great. So this is one that I call the concentration breath. And it almost effectively like hijacks the mind. So the mind can't just go into overdrive when you're feeling it, and it brings in the somatic experience in your body. So what you do is you just start paying attention to your breath. You just bring awareness to your breath as it is right now in that place. And you might start noticing that the breath's going in and through your nose. It's a little bit cooler going in, and then it's a little bit warmer going out. Just paying that attention. Then at the same time, you start rubbing your thumb and your fingers together very softly, very gently. So you're bringing awareness and you're going, oh, wow, I can feel the sensation between my thumb and my fingers. But don't forget the awareness of the breath. You're also being aware of the breath as well. And maybe you're even just having awareness that a beautiful, perfect breath is this 5-second breath in and 5 seconds out through the nose, nice and slow and deep. And you just start feeling a little bit more relaxed. Then at the same time, you might start rubbing your tongue on the roof of your mouth, just very gently. And you can do this right now. As I'm looking at you, I wouldn't even know you're doing this.
I'm doing it.
Yeah, you're doing it. And you're paying attention to your thumb and your fingers, tongue on your roof of your mouth, and you're paying attention to your breath. And in this state, you're completely invincible. Nothing. There's no thoughts. You're just present. You're aware. I could yell at you right now and you won't be activated. Completely calm. So this is just a great one. Whenever you start feeling that there's a little bit of energy, a little bit of unease in the body, just go back to these 3 things. And it will force you to just being present in the moment. You don't even get a chance to even indulge the thought because it's just spaciousness. And in that place, you could be getting triggered so much and it doesn't affect you. You've just stopped the trigger. So I love that breath. It's one I use in business environments all the time because no one even knows you're doing it. It's not like this active breath that you're like, oh, sorry, I just need to take a big active breath. That sometimes just throw things. You can be in this experience. A great one with your partner. Great one as a parent. Just, oh yeah, I'm bringing awareness. Great one even on a podcast. I've been doing that a lot today to make sure that I've been present and not focused on how I'm being perceived or what I'm saying. I just allow the information to come through me.
There's an exercise I do from time to time, particularly when shame comes up. And, shame is in many ways, the thing that people report, what they hate most about shame isn't the content of the shame, but the actual physical sensation of it.
Yes.
Right. So what I do is, and people can't see me if they're listening to this in their car, but if I just put my fingers right above like where my heart area is, and I just do this, I just draw a circle with my hand and then do essentially like a box breath. So like a 5 count in through the nose and then blowing out like through a straw for 5. And I usually park the breath just for a moment at the top, just for like a second. So it's like, and this actually has a lot to do with the nervous system and about soothing, right? Like it's actually just what we do even with babies, right? With children, right?
Yes.
It's just like, it's like here for you. I'm here for you. It's okay. We're here. And just that for 20 seconds, right? Do it 3 or 4 or 5 times, right? Has a way of, you realize these states are not monolithic. They're actually quite vaporous. Right?
Yes.
They're not.
And imagine if everyone did that. There wouldn't be wars. There wouldn't be conflict. There wouldn't be all these challenges.
It would help.
It'd be amazing.
Yeah. Right.
Yes.
And so because most people are living in reactivity. And so it's just in my last book, I wrote about how most people, it seems to me, are like people trapped in an old-fashioned phone booth with a murder hornet. They're just, swatting around and just reacting, like trying to not get stung. That's just no way to live your life, Wow, this has been incredibly rich. I have loved it, Finnian. And I'm so grateful for your new book, Intentionality, a groundbreaking guide to breath consciousness, and radical self-transformation. Finnian Kelly, Enneagram 7. Thank you so much for being on with us, man.
Thanks so much, Ian and Anthony. Really deep conversation. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
I loved it. And hey, to all of you listening, you know how much we love you. May you have love. May you have joy. May you have peace. May you have healing. And may you have rest. Until the next time.